I walked into the cafe, and there she was. Sitting at a corner table, as though she belonged to the quiet sunlight spilling across the wooden floor, she looked up, and my chest hitched before my brain could even catch up. Her hair, a soft wave of silver and chestnut, brushed against her collarbone in a way that made me want to lean closer, just to see the light play across it. "Hey," I said, voice a little too loud for the otherwise gentle hum of morning conversations. She smiled, slow and careful, like she was measuring the space between us, gauging whether I could cross it. "Hey," she said back, eyes flicking from my face to the chair I was pulling out, lingering just a second too long on my hands, my sleeves, the awkward way I tried not to fidget. We sat, and the silence stretched, not uncomfortable, exactly, but heavy, like a quiet room after a storm. Her presence wasn't loud, but it pressed against me in the best possible way, a warmth I couldn't explain. She had this grace, like she had learned to move around the world without spilling her heart, but every so often, a hesitation in her smile betrayed something fragile underneath. I wanted to trace it, carefully, but I told myself I'd be patient. Our hands brushed once when she reached for her coffee cup. A flash, accidental but electric. I felt it all the way to my fingertips, and I looked down, trying to play it off, but I caught her watching me, just for a moment, before her gaze drifted elsewhere. "You always come here this early?" I asked, words smaller than I intended. She tilted her head, lips pressed lightly together, considering how much to say. "Sometimes." "Not always," she murmured. Her voice had a warmth, low and deliberate, and it slid under my skin like it had been waiting for me. I wanted to say something clever, something that would make her laugh, but I couldn't. My eyes kept finding her, the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the subtle curve of her neck, the faint scent of vanilla and something soft, almost like linen. I realized I'd been holding my breath and exhaled slowly, letting her fill the space I didn't know existed in me. She glanced at me again, almost shyly, almost teasingly, and for a moment, the air between us felt liquid. Time condensed, the other patrons, the baristas, the city beyond the windows, all of it disappeared. I tried to focus on my coffee, but it tasted like nothing. I could feel her presence pressing closer even though she hadn't moved. My hand itched to reach for hers again, not to hold, not yet, but to acknowledge the silent electricity humming between us. She caught the flicker of desire in my eyes and smiled, a slow, secretive smile that said she knew. She always knew. Then, just as the tension seemed unbearable, the cafe door opened. A gust of wind pushed in, scattering leaves along the sidewalk, and a man called out to someone near the counter. She flinched slightly, her head jerking toward the interruption, and I realized, absurdly, how disappointed I felt to have the spell broken. She leaned back, lips parting, eyes darting toward the doorway, and for the briefest instant, her hand hovered near mine on the table, as if she were debating whether to reach. And then the moment passed. I didn't know if she'd stay, or if this was just coffee after all. But I knew, with a certainty I couldn't name, that nothing about this morning felt casual, nothing about her felt casual. I kept replaying that morning in my mind, the way she had looked at me, measured and deliberate. I didn't want to admit how much I was thinking about her, but the truth had a weight I couldn't ignore. She arrived the next day in the same quiet grace, slipping past the barista with a nod, coffee in hand, as though she belonged in this little ritual, and I didn't. I told myself to focus on the steam rising from my cup, on the bitter tang of it, on anything but the curve of her smile or the way her fingers lingered over the edge of the table when she set her mug down. "You're early," she said, eyes bright, but there was a hesitance in the tilt of her head, the pause before the words left her mouth. "Habit," I said, too quickly. My gaze found her hands, the faint scar on her wrist, the way her knuckles whitened when she gripped her cup. I'd been watching her from afar before, noticing the quiet sighs when a chair scraped too loud, the faint tension in her shoulders that no one else seemed to see. She had a kind of elegance that wasn't effortless, it was earned, carved out of years of caution, careful steps, and perhaps, a few heartbreaks. I thought about why she might hesitate, why she lingered near me yet never closed the distance. There was risk here, an age gap that people would whisper about, a closeness that could be misread, a desire neither of us fully dared to voice. And yet, despite the invisible barriers, I found myself leaning just a little closer, noticing the subtle warmth of her presence, the soft scent of coffee and her perfume mingling in the air between us. When she spoke, her voice was a soft tremor, almost too intimate for a public place. I noticed the way her breath brushed against my cheek when she laughed, and the tiny shiver that ran through my chest in response. She placed her hand on the table, near mine, and it hovered there, almost like she was testing boundaries, almost like she wanted me to notice, which I did, far too much. She told me, half joking, half serious, about a friend she hadn't seen in years, the way the conversation lingered on memories of past mistakes and lost chances. I listened, letting my hand inch ever so slightly toward hers, my eyes tracing the way her lips moved. There was a vulnerability in her that she didn't reveal often, a softness that contradicted the confident facade she wore like armor. And in that moment, something unspoken passed between us. A pause stretched, filled with static electricity, charged with all the words neither of us dared say. Her eyes flicked toward mine, and I caught the faintest hesitation, the almost imperceptible bite of her lower lip, the small lift of her hand as if she might brush against mine, and then she didn't. But she stayed. Her presence lingered closer than necessary, a subtle magnetism I couldn't resist. I realized, slowly, that the rules, the age difference, the social caution, the pasts we carried, meant nothing in the warmth of this stolen moment. All that mattered was the small, tender connection suspended between us, like a held breath, waiting for someone to exhale first. And for the first time, in a way that felt dangerous and thrilling, I didn't want the moment to end. The cafe was quieter than usual that afternoon. I had arrived early, my notebook open but unread, my eyes constantly drifting toward her. She entered just as the bell above the door chimed, and for a moment, everything froze, the sunlight catching her hair, the faint scent of her perfume lingering in the air, a quiet electricity that seemed to pulse in the space between us. She slid into the chair across from me, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her body. Our knees brushed beneath the table, and I tensed, pretending to shift my weight as if it were accidental. But she didn't pull away. She never did, not completely. We spoke softly, each word carefully measured, the pauses between them heavier than the sentences themselves. I wanted to lean in, wanted to close the inch that separated our faces, but my hands froze on my notebook, betraying nothing but nerves. Then, almost like the universe testing us, a friend of hers appeared at the doorway. She straightened, just slightly, a flicker of tension crossing her features. I felt my stomach tighten, that familiar mixture of guilt and longing. We weren't doing anything wrong, technically, but the thrill of near discovery made every glance, every brush of fingers, feel amplified, dangerous. The friend called out to her, and for a brief second, our connection frayed. Her hand lingered over mine on the table, as if hesitating between retreat and insistence. I caught the fleeting tremor in her fingers. My chest tightened. When the friend walked away, finally, she exhaled, almost imperceptibly. I wanted to lean closer, but she gave me a small, secretive smile instead, the kind that said she understood all the things we weren't supposed to say aloud. Her eyes held mine for a heartbeat too long, and my own lips felt dry. There was a moment, just one, when our faces edged closer, the faint brush of her hair against my cheek, the warmth of her breath mingling with mine. I could have leaned in, could have closed that last inch, but we both hesitated. Fear of judgment, fear of crossing a line, fear of what it might mean, it held us back. Her hand remained near mine, though, fingertips occasionally brushing against my knuckles in a gesture that was both accidental and deliberate. Every tiny touch sent a ripple through me, a current I couldn't name, a longing I couldn't suppress. We spoke less and less, letting silence fill the spaces where words would ruin the tension. I noticed the tilt of her head, the almost imperceptible bite of her lip, the subtle arch of her brow as she tried not to meet my gaze directly. And yet, our eyes kept finding each other, like magnets drawn together against our better judgment. Finally, the world outside faded entirely. Chairs scraped somewhere in the distance, a barista called an order, but none of it mattered. She leaned just slightly closer than necessary, and I felt the pull, magnetic, undeniable. My own restraint wavered, but I didn't move. I wanted to, desperately, but we were both caught in the liminal space between wanting and fearing. And then, without a word, without a conscious decision, we were closer than we'd ever been, knees pressed together beneath the table, hands almost touching, breaths mingling, hearts racing in tandem. The pull between us was stronger than logic, stronger than caution, and yet, somehow, neither of us acted. It was enough, terrifying and exquisite enough, to leave us suspended, holding a quiet tension that neither wanted to break, even as every fiber of our bodies begged for more. The cafe had emptied, leaving only the hum of the espresso machine and the faint rustle of papers. She was closer than usual, leaning slightly forward, elbows resting on the table, and I could feel the warmth radiating from her in a way that made my chest tighten. My hands itched to reach for hers, but I froze, afraid of breaking the fragile, electric balance we had built. I shouldn't be here, she said suddenly, voice low, almost a whisper, as if she were confessing to herself. Her eyes were wide, searching mine, and for a second, I saw a flicker of fear that she was letting herself fall into something she shouldn't. You shouldn't? I echoed softly, leaning in just enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume, warm and faintly floral, brushing against my senses like a secret promise. Her hand moved, almost unconsciously, toward her hair. She brushed it back, a strand falling across her cheek, and I reached out before I could stop myself, tucking it gently behind her ear. My fingers lingered, grazing her skin, and I felt a shiver pass through her. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. She started, then stopped, lips parting in a hesitation I couldn't bear to watch. My own pulse thundered in my ears. Every breath she drew felt impossibly close, every blink a punctuation in the rhythm between us. I wanted to tell her everything I'd been feeling, all the longing, the quiet obsession that had built since the first morning I saw her, but the words lodged in my throat. Instead, I let my hand hover near hers, fingertips brushing in tiny, deliberate sparks of contact. She shivered at each brush, a sound so soft I almost missed it, and I realized then how utterly undone I was by her presence. You're thinking about it too much, she said finally, voice trembling slightly, though she tried to sound calm. About me. I can't stop, I admitted, low, barely audible. My lips were close enough to her ear that she could feel the vibration of my words. I don't want to. Her breath hitched. Her eyes dropped, then rose to meet mine again, glimmering with something raw, unspoken. The tension between us was unbearable, a taut line stretched across years of caution and desire. I leaned in just slightly more, so that the edge of my cheek brushed against hers. Her head tilted, ever so subtly, and I felt the press of her body against mine, a delicious, tentative weight that made every rational thought vanish. Maybe we're not supposed to, she whispered, voice low and uncertain, trembling just enough to betray the command of her words. And yet, she didn't move away. She didn't pull her hand from the table. Her lips parted ever so slightly, as though she were inviting something I didn't dare name aloud. The world narrowed to us, to the warmth, the scent, the pulse of our hearts in sync. I could feel her breath on my skin, the faint tremor of her fingers. I leaned in a fraction closer, drawn by gravity I couldn't resist. The line between restraint and surrender was razor thin. Our lips were inches apart, the promise of contact hanging in the air, electric and inevitable. And then, the cafe door swung open with a sharp jingle, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife, and we both froze. My heart slammed against my ribs, her eyes wide, our mouths still dangerously close, suspended between what could happen and what the world insisted could not. The cafe had emptied entirely now, the golden light of late afternoon slanting through the windows. I was just about to speak when her phone buzzed sharply against the table. She glanced at it, lips tightening ever so slightly. I didn't recognize the name flashing across the screen, and the subtle twitch of her hand, hesitation, maybe guilt, caught my attention like a flare. She answered quietly, voice controlled but strained. Yes. I didn't mean to. No, it's fine. Her words were clipped, polite, but there was something under the surface. I watched her fingers curl tightly around the device, knuckles whitening, and I realized with a jolt that something I hadn't known was at play had just landed between us. She hung up and stared at her coffee, the steam curling between us, masking the tremor in her hands. He knows, she said finally, voice low, as if admitting it out loud would make it real. Knows what? I asked, and the syllables sounded clumsy even to me. Her eyes lifted, meeting mine, and the expression she wore made my chest tighten, regret, fear, desire, all tangled together. Someone saw us, she admitted, fingers brushing across the table toward mine. And, it wasn't supposed to happen. They think. She stopped, swallowed, then shook her head. It doesn't matter. Not now. I didn't know what to say. My own heartbeat thundered in my ears, not just from desire, but from the sudden risk, the way the air between us seemed charged and dangerous. She leaned slightly forward, her shoulder brushing mine, sending a jolt up my spine, and I realized how deeply I wanted her in that moment, even as everything outside those four walls seemed ready to judge us. I started, voice low, trying to steady myself. You don't have to. She cut me off, hand lifting, hovering near mine, trembling just enough that my chest clenched. I can't lie to myself, she whispered, and I caught the quiver in her lip, the faint flush creeping over her cheek. Not anymore. The weight of her words pressed down on me. Everything that had been simmering between us, every stolen glance, every brush of fingers, every hesitant lean closer, now carried a risk I couldn't ignore. Yet somehow, the danger made the pull stronger. Her presence was magnetic, intoxicating. I could feel the warmth of her body through the thin space separating us, could sense her breath catch when I moved slightly closer. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the gap that felt both terrifying and irresistible, but she pulled back just a fraction, as if testing my restraint. The almost touch between our hands lingered in the air, a promise and a warning all at once. My pulse raced, every nerve ending alert to her subtle movements, the tremor of her fingers, the small tilt of her head toward mine. We can't stay like this, she murmured, almost too softly for me to hear, but I did. And yet, when our eyes met, it was clear we weren't moving away either. The risk made us more alive, more aware, more inevitable. I leaned closer, just enough for her warmth to brush against me, for the faint brush of her hair to graze my cheek. And in that suspended moment, charged with danger and desire, the choice was mine, to step forward, to close the distance, to finally act on everything we had been holding back. But the world outside was still watching, and the decision had consequences we couldn't ignore. The cafe felt impossibly small, the walls pressing in with the heat of the late afternoon sun. We sat across from each other, breathing unevenly, hands inches apart, and I could feel the pull between us like gravity. Every glance, every half-smile, every tiny shift of weight carried meaning, urgent, electric, impossible to ignore. I can't keep pretending, she whispered, voice low, fragile, yet full of a certainty I had never heard before. Her fingers hovered near mine, trembling ever so slightly. My own hands were shaking, I could feel her warmth even before our skin touched. Neither can I said, barely more than a breath. I leaned in slowly, letting my shoulder graze hers, letting her feel the pull I had fought for weeks. She didn't pull away. Instead, her eyes softened, glimmering with something raw, something tender that I wanted desperately to hold onto. We were closer than ever, noses nearly brushing, the space between us vibrating with unspoken words. My pulse thundered, but it wasn't fear, not entirely. It was anticipation, longing, the kind of tension that left your chest tight and your hands itching to reach out. I shouldn't, she started, and then stopped, biting her lip in a hesitation that made my chest ache. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the years, the caution, the fear of judgment, all clashing with the desire that had been simmering between us. I know, I whispered, my voice low enough for only her to hear, but I've waited too long to care about what I should. Her breath caught, and I felt her leaning just a fraction closer, the subtle shift enough for our hands to brush. That fleeting contact set off a spark that ran straight through me. She shivered lightly, and I wanted to trace the line of her fingers, wanted to memorize the way she responded to the smallest touch. For a heartbeat, we both held still, suspended in the moment between reason and surrender. Then, without another word, I reached, fingertips just grazing hers, letting her decide whether to pull away or hold on. Her hand closed over mine, firm, certain, and I exhaled, the tension breaking in the most delicious way. She tilted her head toward me, lips parting slightly, eyes shining with a mixture of relief and daring. I mirrored her movement, careful, hesitant, savoring every inch of closeness without crossing the line, yet every nerve in my body screamed for more. And then, finally, we spoke without words. The brush of her hand against mine, the tilt of her shoulder against mine, the almost imperceptible lean of her head toward mine, all of it said what neither of us could fully voice. Desire, understanding, trust, and the acknowledgement of every flaw and fear that had brought us here. We were no longer pretending. We were here, together, suspended in the messy, human truth of what we felt. Every hesitation, every boundary, every secret longing had led to this exact moment. I rested my forehead lightly against hers, our breaths mingling, and for the first time, I felt the clarity I had been chasing. She understood me completely, as I understood her. There were no lies, no pretenses, no careful steps left to take. Only the raw, undeniable, beautiful reality of us. And in that shared breath, I knew we had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The city outside the cafe had begun to soften in the evening light, the streets awash with gold and shadow. Inside, we lingered at our table, hands still intertwined, the earlier tension dissolved into something quieter, deeper, a connection that didn't need words to validate it. I traced the back of her hand with my thumb, slow and deliberate, and she let out a small, contented sigh. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, hair brushing against my cheek, and I felt a calm I hadn't known was possible. All the hesitation, all the fear of judgment or what-ifs, seemed to melt away in the warmth of her presence. "You know," she murmured, voice soft but certain, "I thought I'd never feel this, safe with someone again." I smiled, heart swelling. "I didn't think I could either," I admitted. "Not with anyone, not like this." She lifted her head just enough to look at me, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight, the faintest curve of a smile tugging at her lips. "Age doesn't matter," she said, a statement and a question all at once. "Not when this feels right." I leaned closer, careful not to rush, letting my forehead rest against hers. The world seemed to shrink until only the two of us existed, the hum of the cafe, the distant street sounds, the scent of coffee mingling with her perfume, all blending into a quiet, perfect moment. "Then we just take it one step at a time?" I whispered. She nodded, lips brushing against mine in a delicate, tentative kiss on the forehead, a gesture more intimate than words could ever be. My chest expanded with relief, with awe, with an understanding that the messy, complicated, imperfect thing between us was finally ours. We stayed like that for a while, hands intertwined, shoulders touching, hearts slowly sinking in a rhythm neither of us needed to explain. I noticed the small details, the soft tremor in her fingers when she finally relaxed, the way her hair tickled my cheek, the warmth of her breath against my skin. Every little thing reaffirmed what I already knew, the connection we had built, hesitant, forbidden, electric, had survived, and now it could grow. The cafe lights dimmed, and the barista gave us a quiet nod as she closed for the night. We didn't move immediately, there was no rush. Leaving felt optional. Here, in this small, suspended bubble, we had found a place that belonged only to us. Finally, she stood, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face, and I followed, fingers still intertwined, walking out into the evening together. There was laughter in her eyes, and I caught it in mine, knowing that the next steps wouldn't be easy, but they would be ours. I leaned down slightly as we paused at the street corner, pressing a gentle kiss to her hand, lingering just long enough to say without words that I would stay, that I understood her fully, and that she understood me. We walked on, side by side, hearts light, fears eased, and the kind of warmth that comes from finally being seen by someone who matters most wrapping around both of us. And as the city glowed around us, I realized this was the beginning, not the end, and for the first time, I didn't want to be anywhere else. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?